Today I'm gonna show you every mistake when it comes to steak. Now we all chase that perfect juicy bite, but standing between you and a great steak are hundreds of tiny mistakes you might not even realize you're making. In our quest to cook better steaks, we must confront what ruins them first. Let's explore the dark side. Starting with the king of all steaks, the one and only ribeye. Ribeye is debatably the best cut on the cow, but keep in mind it's only the first of many incredible cuts we'll be exploring in this video. Now, the biggest mistake when it comes to this cut is thinking that all ribeyes are created equal. As you can see, there is a very big difference in anatomy when it comes to the ribeye on this side when you compare it to the ribeye on the other side. For demonstration purposes, I'm gonna take one ribeye from this side here, which is the front of the animal, and I'll take a second steak from the exact opposite side, which is the rear of the animal. What you'll find is that yes, these are both ribeyes, but upon close inspection, they're actually quite different. So what makes a ribeye are two key components. We have the eye of the ribeye as well as the ribeye cap. As you can see, the steak from the rear of the animal has a large eye, but virtually no cap muscle. Compare that to the steak from the front of the animal, which as you can see has a massive ribeye cap. Now the ribeye cap is by far the most flavorful and best cut on the entire cow. So the trick is to always choose ribeyes with the biggest cap possible. Again, two steaks that are the exact same price per pound, but this one right here is going to be significantly better. The next time you're at the butcher's counter, what you'll often see is a whole rib roast worth of ribeyes perfectly sliced up just like this. The steaks from the front of the animal are all gonna have the biggest cap. Notice how they start to get smaller and smaller up until they're virtually non-existent. What I'd encourage you to do is roughly only choose steaks in this area right here. Anything further back and you're just not getting the most out of your ribeyes. The other key issue when choosing ribeyes and really just steaks in general is not being aware of marbling. As a refresher, marbling is that fat on the inside of the meat. In general, more is better. It's what leads to that tender and juicy bite. So let's compare these two ribeyes. Not only is the ribeye cap significantly bigger on this one, but as you can see, it also has way better marbling. So while both these steaks might be about 20 bucks, this guy right here is going to be significantly better. Now to cook our beautiful ribeye, I'm gonna show you some of the most common mistakes. The first is using regular table salt to season. While table salt isn't inherently bad, because the granules are so small, it quickly absorbs and makes it very difficult to visually see how much you're adding. Instead, my strong preference is to use kosher salt. Notice how big and coarse those granules are, making it super easy to tell how much you're using. For a steak this thick, that should be perfect. The other thing people like to do is kind of get crazy with the seasoning, often adding fine ingredients like garlic powder or onion powder, or even worse, adding something like a sweet barbecue rub. These become a major issue specifically when cooking in a pan. The issue with things like garlic powder or barbecue rubs is they are very susceptible to burning, and as you can see, they often do before we're able to actually caramelize the crust of the steak. Instead, when pan searing, I only season with kosher salt and sometimes black pepper, allowing us to get a deep crust without any burning. This is that golden brown color we're looking for. Back to that burnt steak. Unfortunately, we have another problem, and if you've ever cooked a ribeye, you've probably seen this one before. As you can see, our expensive prized cap muscle that we spent so much time looking for has sadly completely separated from the steak. And this will lead to a significant problem that you're about to see. As you can see, the eye of the ribeye is cooked to perfection. The problem is that because our beautiful ribeye cap separated and kind of cooked separately, it is now completely gray and overcooked, despite the rest of the steak looking perfect. This lack of consistency is not what we want to see. But have no fear, this is how to do it right. I'm actually going to very gently tie up our ribeye. Now this is optional, but it will guarantee that the cap doesn't separate. Just ensure you do it quite loosely. You don't want the steak to buckle. Medium-high heat pan, high smoke point oil like avocado, gently adding in the steak, and from here, I really like to add pressure either with your hand or best case using a little steak weight. And this right here is what it's all about. That dark mahogany crust is fully caramelized, definitely not burnt, and we've maintained that beautiful shape. Now this next one's related to slicing the ribeye, and what I see is people don't savor the cap, so I'm gonna show you how to do that. What I typically like to do is find that seam where the cap is located, and you can almost peel it off just like so. Now in a perfect world, you just grab this piece right here, you go to the bathroom, you eat it all by yourself, you don't tell anybody about it. But if you're feeling generous, this is what you can do. Start by slicing up the cap to nice little chunks just like this. As you can see, it's still a beautiful rosy pink because we made sure the cap didn't separate. I mean, just look at that piece of meat there. I'm telling you, there's nothing better. Now this step's fully up to you, but personally, if I'm serving this for guests, I'll kind of touch up the sides here, get rid of a lot of the exterior fat, though I won't judge you if you keep it on. And from here, take some nice slices of the eye of the ribeye. As you can see, cook this to a nice medium rare, maybe getting close to medium, but in my opinion, given how rich and fatty it is, cooking it a little bit closer to medium is ideal. And there it is. It really doesn't get much better than that. Served with a little bit of flaky salt. That right there is perfection in steak form. We have made it to the most expensive yet most tender cut on the cow. It's time for tenderloin, aka filet mignon. Okay, now the first mistake I see is buying a whole untrimmed tenderloin and thinking that it's just ready to go. You can chop it up into perfect filet mignon steaks, because that is not the case. As you can see, this thing is covered in fat and silver skin. There's also some unique anatomy. We have this muscle running along the side called the chain. We have a thinner area over here called the tail, and a thick end called the head. To break it down, I'll start by quickly peeling off that chain muscle that I mentioned. You can really just mostly use your hands. The chain is gonna be a bit sinewy, so you can either grind it up into burgers, or you could also slice it thin for a pretty nice stir fry. Now I'll remove the thinner tail section. I'll also remove the thicker head, and to expose the highest quality meat from here, you just very carefully trim down the rest of the tenderloin. You want to get it clean, but of course you don't want to waste any of that meat. This section here is literally as expensive as beef can get. What we're left with is a perfectly cleaned and symmetrical cut known as the Chateaubriand, perfect for beef Wellington or slicing into steaks. I mean, this piece right here is literally worth its weight in gold. For many, there's nothing better. Okay, so this is the part of the video where I'm gonna tell you guys to be selfish. As you know, tenderloin is absurdly expensive, sometimes north of $50 a pound. For that reason, make sure you're buying the best one possible. When you go to the butcher counter and you notice the tenderloins, what you'll find is there is vastly different levels of quality. You'll see beautiful, thick cut tenderloins just like this, with a perfect round, circular symmetry. But what you'll also find are very different looking steaks similar to this. As you can see, we have a seam here, plenty of silver skin on the side, still a relatively nice looking steak, but not nearly as symmetrical as the previous. You'll also see little steaks like this. Well, at first glance, they appear to be a regular filet mignon, but the reality is it's a lot thinner, and when you peel back the layers, it's a little piece of tail meat, and your 50 bucks just went down the drain. So out of this whole selection here, steaks I would never buy, this thing, gone. This steak here, gone. Our little tail meat, see you later. This one on first glance doesn't look terrible. Another tip, look at the back. Ask your butcher to see the bottom of a steak. Major fat seams here, part of the head, part of the chain, gone. But what we're left with are 5 absolutely perfect looking filet mignons that are worth your money. Now I know we've touched on marbling in the past, but when it comes to tenderloin, it is even more important. This is a cut that has virtually no fat. Yes, it's tender, but it's gonna lack a lot of that juiciness, a lot of that flavor. For that reason, when you're comparing tenderloins at the store, always look for the one with the most marbling. Another thing to be aware of is to look out for imposters when it comes to tenderloin. Cuts like the petite sirloin, the eye round, and mock tender all look and are even sometimes marketed very similarly to a filet mignon, but they are all significantly more tough and drastically less premium. Don't get scammed. There's only one true tenderloin. Now, when it comes to cooking, tenderloin is a very easy cut to under-season. If you choose a good one, it's generally gonna be quite thick, meaning it often needs substantially more salt than you might otherwise think. What you need to be aware of is that when searing in a pan, a huge amount of that salt is actually gonna come off the steak and be left in the pan, upwards of 30 to 40% of that salt. So make sure that you season quite heavily. Again, this is a pretty thick cut, so keeping the heat moderate. We don't need it to immediately sear and burn, but we also want to ensure we're developing that beautiful deep mahogany crust. This is also one of those cuts that you definitely want to sear the sides with, kind of just rolling it across the pan like so. As you can see, the color is looking absolutely perfect. Problem is, we are at 77 degrees internal. It is still essentially completely raw. That's why a great strategy is to finish this in the oven, but there is a caveat. Keep in mind, right now, the pan is still extremely hot, and if I throw it in the oven, like so, that hot pan will continue to cook that steak from the bottom, drastically overcooking the bottom of the steak, while the top cooks a lot more slowly. Slicing into it, you can see we have a super pronounced gray band on the bottom. Honestly, it's kind of covering the whole thing because we did not cook this the most optimal way. This strong gradient between the rare interior and gray exterior is called the bullseye that we definitely do not want. So to avoid that, this is how I like to finish a steak. Instead of throwing our hot pan right into the oven, I actually like to move the steak to a rack with airflow coming from above and below. And from here, we can let it finish in the low temp oven for a significantly better edge-to-edge medium rare. But let me take this one step further and show you the most optimized way to cook a tenderloin. Now, instead of starting your tenderloin in a hot pan, we're actually gonna throw it on a rack and into a low temp oven with a process called the reverse sear. Essentially, what we're doing is slow cooking this tenderloin to get a perfect edge-to-edge medium rare. We've also significantly dried out the exterior so that now when it's finally time to sear, we can do it super quickly, achieve that beautiful deep mahogany color, and slicing into it, you can see we have perfectly nailed that edge-to-edge medium rare. The only way to get results like this is to reverse sear. Just take a look at the difference between this one and the previous when it comes to that gray band. Significantly better results, and the only way to do it is with the reverse sear. Now, another mistake I see with tenderloin is that people are afraid to add flavor. And look, I totally get it. You just spent $50 a pound on a piece of meat, but keep in mind, you're not paying for flavor, you're really only paying for tenderness. For that reason, adding something like a compound butter or a cream sauce is actually a great idea when it comes to filet mignon. I personally like to start with the compound butter below, then let that warm tenderloin sort of melt over the top, thus protecting that top crust. And as you can see, yes, this steak is rare. A huge mistake I see is people overcooking tenderloins. This is by far the most tender and lean cut on the cow. For that reason, it's best cooked as rare as possible. So if you ever wanted to experiment with a more rare steak, this is the one for you. Phenomenal. But let me know down in the comments, too rare, just right, overcooked. How do you like your steak? Next up, we have an extremely popular cut, the one and only strip loin, AKA the New York strip. By far the #1 biggest mistake I see when it comes to New York strips is not recognizing that there is a huge difference between both sides of the loin. This is side #1 and it is beautiful. This face is sliced and directly adjacent to the ribeyes. As you can see, it even has a little cat muscle right here. So what it means is if I take a steak from this side right here, what we essentially have is the quality of a ribeye, but priced like a New York strip. Now let's compare that to the other side right here, which unfortunately is a major disaster. This side is taken from the back of the animal, and as you can see, it is just absolutely filled with chewy veins and sinew. But either way, I'll still take a slice just like we did the other side. Side by side, you can really see the difference in quality. Remember, at the store, these are the exact same price, though this one is gonna be extremely chewy with all those gross veins compared to this perfectly symmetrical strip on the right, which I promise will be significantly better, so make sure to use your eyes when choosing your New York strips. Okay, this next one is a bit controversial, but it is to stop wasting money on prime rib. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love prime rib, but if you're interested in saving money, I have a hack for you. The reality is that 99% of your guests will have no idea if you're cooking a real prime rib or if you're cooking one using a big slab of strip loin. You're literally gonna treat it exactly like a prime rib, get it nice and trimmed, tie it up and get it seasoned, onto a rack, and we'll let it roast. I'm telling you, if you whip this thing out at a dinner party and tell people it's prime rib, not a soul will be suspicious. Remember, this comes from the exact same loin as a prime rib. Let's slice and I'll show you what I'm talking about. As you can see, beautiful edge to edge, medium rare, and just extremely juicy. Just as good as prime rib, debatably better given that it doesn't have that unrendered fat knob in the middle. And the best part is, it's at least 20 to 30% cheaper. Okay, time to cook. Now, this next mistake is one that honestly I was the biggest offender of back in college, and that's just because I didn't know any better. Basically, what I do is save enough money to buy a steak and then completely cover it in something like barbecue sauce. The thought process was, I love steak, I also like barbecue sauce, why not marinate them together and have the best of both worlds? Unfortunately, this right here is a big no-no, and you're about to see why. While it might seem like a good idea, marinating expensive steaks with pretty much anything, but particularly a sugar-based rub or sauce, is a recipe for disaster. The sauce will burn before the steak can cook fully, not to mention barely any of the flavor will actually penetrate. And what we're left with is sadly a very rough looking steak. I mean, it's basically covered in charcoal at this point. It's developed this excessively burnt, kind of acrid exterior, though I can't lie, we did sort of nail the internal temp. Okay, that was an absolute disaster. This is how to do it right. When you buy a nice steak like a New York strip, the name of the game is to keep it simple. I'm talking kosher salt, some black pepper. If you're really feeling funky, you can add a little bit of garlic powder. At the end of the day, that's really all you need. I like to start by rendering the fat cap like so to ensure it's nice and crispy. Now, another mistake I often see is people think you can only flip your steak one time. That is absolutely not the case. For a steak like this, we want to keep the heat high for a nice sear. After developing an initial sear, you actually want to be flipping roughly every 30 seconds. This allows you to develop a great crust, but more importantly, cooks the steak evenly as the steak never spends too much time on one side, which would lead to an intense gray band. Another mistake is not using or misusing a meat thermometer. You want to get it right there in the middle, and you actually want to pull your steak roughly 10 degrees lower than your target internal temp to account for the additional increase in internal temp while the steak is resting. And as you can see, we're left with a nice crispy crust and a beautiful edge-to-edge medium rare because we flipped frequently and pulled roughly 10 degrees lower than our target internal temp. When done right, that is the perfect steak. This has sneakily become one of my favorite cuts on the cow. It's time for flank steak. So the biggest mistake I see with this cut is that people seem to think it's boring, but that could not be further from the truth. The reality is that it is the perfect canvas to experiment with something like a marinade, which can be extremely fun and tasty. So let's talk about marinades. In my opinion, any good marinade will be comprised of 6 components. Each plays a crucial role for the perfect balance of flavors. The first is your oil. These ensure flavors are distributed evenly and a little extra punch of flavor with that sesame oil. Next is the dry seasonings. These are critical in providing a deep depth of flavor. I love adding cumin, some chipotle powder, paprika. You can even add some dried herbs like oregano and basil. Next up are fresh ingredients. Think herbs, garlic, and fresh chilies. In contrast to the concentrated dried spices, these are gonna give more of a bright, fresh flair to the marinade. Next up, we have the acids. This can be anything from citrus like lemon and lime to something like a vinegar. Now, you don't want to go too crazy with this stuff because it does have some pretty intense tenderizing properties, but they are key when it comes to balancing out those flavors. Next up, we have our salty components, which of course can just be regular salt, but you can also get creative with something like Worcestershire or soy sauce, or my personal favorite, fish sauce. And finally, our sweet components, think honey or maple syrup. These are key in balancing out the acidic components, and in small amounts can also be very helpful in developing a beautiful char. The first thing you'll notice is I didn't measure anything. I'm telling you, if you use those 5 components, you will be in a very good place. The other thing is I did not add the meat yet. What that allows me to do is mix it up just like this, give it a little taste, and adjust as necessary. Honestly, that is perfect. It's got a little kick to it, a little bite from that lemon lime situation. That's gonna be insane.
Dude, I will eat this as soup. It's so good.
This is more of a minor detail, but on a flank steak, there is a thicker side. What I like to do is very, very gently score it on that side in particular. It'll sort of help it cook a bit faster and also allow all those beautiful marinating ingredients to penetrate deeply. With that, into the marinade. Make sure to get all those flavors incorporated. The marinade like this, you really don't need too much time. Honestly, anywhere from 1 hour even, probably up to about 12 is perfect. Now that we're marinated, it's time to grill, but a very common mistake from here is putting this wet meat directly on a grill. That is a no-no. Any sort of moisture is the enemy of a good sear, and that also applies when it comes to marinated steaks. What it essentially does is steams before you can develop that nice crispy char, so for that reason we're patting it dry. As you can see, with the one we patted dry, we've quickly developed this beautiful dark crust. That is the color we're looking for. Now compare that to this one that's still wet, taking way longer to develop color, and we're left with a pretty meh looking crust. Personally, this sort of color is what I'm looking for. Not cutting flank steak against the grain is the easiest way to ruin it, but if you've ever been confused about how to locate the grain on a steak, fortunately, flank steak is the easiest. We have these long muscle fibers moving up and down. That's the direction of the grain. The flank steak makes it easy. To reiterate, this is what you don't want to do. With the grain moving this way, slicing like so would be considered slicing with the grain. Biting into this steak is virtually impossible. Instead, we turn it like this, and from here, take our beautiful slices against the grain. Remember, the thinner you go on your slices, the more tender it'll be. When it comes to flank steak, I find slices roughly this thickness here are perfect. As you can see, when cut against the grain, it is pull-apart tender. Look, I usually love keeping it simple, but every once in a while, a good marinade is just incredible. This is the steak I'm most passionate about because it is just that good. It's time for skirt steak. Now, the number one biggest mistake people make when it comes to skirt steak is not understanding that there's a major difference between an outside skirt steak and an inside skirt steak. Now, these are two completely different cuts that are often marketed and sold as being the exact same thing, but in terms of quality, it's a night and day difference. Starting with the outside skirt steak, what you'll notice is that it's a lot more narrow than the more wide inside skirt steak. What you'll also notice is the outside skirt steak is typically significantly more marbled than the more lean inside skirt steak. So take a good look at these two, because there's even been times when butchers won't know the difference between the two, so you'll be forced to kind of choose for yourself, because the outside skirt steak on every level is just significantly better. So the way I remember this is that outdoor grilling, aka the outside skirt steak, is always better than indoor or inside skirt steak cooking. Okay, it is time to cook our outside skirt steak. Now, a common mistake I see is people thinking they have to leave it completely whole. Rather, a better idea is to slice it into 2, maybe even 3 pieces. It's just a little bit more manageable, and you'll be left with pieces that are an even thickness. As you can see, this thinner tail section is gonna cook significantly faster than the thicker center cut. Time to season, and for a steak this thin, it's very important not to over season. Specifically, this thinner one, I'm adding just a very tiny amount of seasoning. Thin cuts are very easy to over salt. And we'll get it on the grill. Now, slicing skirt steak wrong is the next mistake I see all the time. Slicing skirt steak against the grain is particularly important and very easy to do. As you can see, the grain is very distinctive on this cut, running the short way, like so. This kills me when I see it online, but I often see people beautifully grill up a skirt steak and then slice directly with the grain like this. Do not do this, please. I'm only doing this for educational purposes. You're left with these chewy fibers running the wrong way, and it turns into a stringy, chewy cut of beef. Instead, this is how you want to do it. With our grain running this way, I'll start by cutting it in half. I like to stack them, turn like so, allowing us to slice perfectly against the grain. You might be thinking, Max, this looks absolutely perfect. No, we have another mistake here. As you can see, I cooked this skirt steak extremely rare, and trust me, I am a guy who loves a rare steak as much as the next guy, but this steak in particular is extremely beefy. It has a lot of marbling, and you really don't want to undercook it. It's something that I used to do all the time. This is more what I'm looking for. Once again, first slice with the grain, stack it, and take some slices. As you can see, still nice rosy pink on the inside, but it doesn't have that dark, cool center, and I promise you, by cooking it a little closer to medium, maybe even medium well, you'll be left with a significantly better steak compared to its slightly undercooked counterpart. Next up, it's time for one of the most overrated cuts, but it's still an important one. This is the porterhouse. As a refresher, the porterhouse is made out of 3 components. We have the tenderloin or filet mignon side, the bone itself, which is in the shape of a T, and finally, the New York strip side. And the first mistake is accidentally paying porterhouse prices when in reality you're only getting a T-bone. What I mean by this is that you'll often see two steaks just like this priced at an absurdly high porterhouse price, when the reality is this guy right here is actually a T-bone. The big difference between a T-bone and a porterhouse is that the T-bone is going to have an extremely small tenderloin. So in most situations, I would recommend completely avoiding T-bones unless there happens to be incredible marbling.
Ow!
But now this is where things start to get quite confusing, because you might think, okay, we don't want a T-bone with a small tenderloin. Let's choose the porterhouse with the biggest tenderloin possible, like this guy right here, except that would be wrong. The critical issue with porterhouses that happen to have the biggest tenderloin is that despite a large tenderloin, the New York strip side is a disaster. Based on the anatomy of a cow, a super large tenderloin guarantees the New York strip will have that really chewy vein we referenced before. So all that said, when choosing your porterhouse at the supermarket, it's all about balance. We want to stay away from the porterhouses that have the tiny tenderloins like this. On the other end of the spectrum, when the tenderloin is too big, we risk that chewy vein on the New York strip, so we also want to be wary of those, leaving us with a perfect porterhouse in the middle that still has a relatively large tenderloin, but still a fully consistent New York strip. Now the next thing to be wary of is cooking a porterhouse in a pan. The issue is that due to that uneven shape and that bone kind of protruding through the center, you're often left with a very inconsistent sear just like this. Now you should also be aware that because the tenderloin is significantly smaller and also way more lean, you actually want to cook it a lot less than the New York strip, so anything you can do to slow down the cooking on the tenderloin side, like for example focusing the heat on the New York strip, is going to be ideal. If for example you're reverse searing your porterhouse, what you can do is face that New York strip side towards the back of the oven where it's a little bit more hot. That's just another way to slow down the cooking of the tenderloin. Not always my favorite steak, but when done right, not bad. We have made it to literally my all-time least favorite cut, but I do have a tip that can make this surprisingly delicious. Eye round is a tough cut similar to London broil or top and bottom round, and these tips apply to them all. The biggest mistake you can make is thinking, you know, I just scored this eye round for like $5, I'm gonna cook it to medium rare like I normally would a steak, and thinking it'll taste good. Oh, you'll literally be chewing this cut all day. Oh. Some people think if you cook this for a long time and braise or slow cook like a brisket, it'll make it taste good. Unfortunately, there's very little collagen in it, and this process will make it extremely dry. Not good. But have no fear, because look, this is an affordable cut and I'm gonna teach you exactly how to make it taste incredible. What I like to do is start with a nice sized piece like this, very simply hit it with some oil, followed by your favorite beef seasonings. From here onto a rack, then into a low temp oven or smoker. Slow cooked to medium rare, what we've essentially made is a beautiful homemade deli roast beef. Now the ultimate key here is slicing directly against the grain, so thin you're almost shaving the beef. Again, this is a very tough cut, so cutting against the grain is beyond critical. Very different than the first preparation I showed you, just cooking it to medium rare like a steak. And these are the pieces we're left with. As you can see, just completely fall apart tender. These are gonna make some incredible deli slices for sandwiches. And the beautiful thing is you can typically get this cut for like $4 or $5 a pound. If you understand these key components, it is absolutely delicious. We have made it to perhaps the most exciting cut of the day, chuck roast. This cut has enormous potential, but it is absolutely critical to choose the right one, and to do so, we must first understand the anatomy. There are two very different sides to a chuck roast. This one right here is extremely premium. The other is significantly worse. Starting with our premium side right here, this is the one directly connected to the ribeyes. As a result, it looks very similar to a ribeye. We even have some of that calf muscle here. This area is what's known as the poor man's ribeye. What that means is that the first roughly 4 inches coming off this side are gonna be extremely valuable. Now, typically when you see chuck at the store, it's gonna be sliced up into these chunks chunks roughly this thickness. And what it means is that some of our slices are gonna come from that more premium section, while others are gonna be taken towards the back. With our chuck roast all sliced up, this is the format you'll typically see it in the supermarket. These are gonna be from the more premium ribeye side of the animal, whereas these here are from the other side. The first thing you'll notice from the ones closest to the ribeye are the poor man's ribeyes, which can be found right here. It does take a little bit of practice, but once you do, you can easily locate it. The other major distinguishing feature is actually gonna be the Denver steaks, and that is where this steak starts to get extremely fun. If you look close, you'll find a steak right here, which is actually the Denver. It kind of has this streaky look to it here, and then moves to more of a highly marbled cap on these steaks. As we move towards the back, what you'll find is that chuck eye becomes less noticeable and kind of interlocks with all those other muscles. The Denver also starts to become non-existent. So the number one name of the game is to choose a chuck roast that has the biggest Denver steak possible. So for today's purposes, I'm gonna choose this guy right here towards the front of the animal and show you how I break it down. What we can do is break this down into 3 distinct sections. First, we have our chuck eye right here. Just by following the seam, very easily peel that muscle away. And that is a perfect little chuck eye steak. It's gonna be a bit more chewy than a ribeye, but if you can appreciate a beefy cut, it's gonna be incredible. Next, we'll specifically remove the Denver, which is this guy right here. So once again, just kind of following the fat seams and just kind of trimming it up. And that right there is a beautiful Denver steak. In my opinion, one of the most underrated. What that means is that for the price of an $8 chuck roast, this is what we're left with. We have a poor man's ribeye that's typically gonna go for at least like 15 bucks a pound, a Denver steak that's sometimes gonna be closer to 20 bucks a pound, and finally a little bit of trim here that you can either grind up into burgers or use for stew meat. Now, I do wanna apologize. I know this video is getting a little bit nerdy, maybe a little bit boring, but let me know down in the comments if you do enjoy this type of content. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, with our Denver steak cooked, we have a reoccurring theme here, but one that is particularly important for the Denver steak, and that is to not slice with the grain. Going directly against the grain here. Ooh, you can see just how juicy the Denver steak is. This is why I love it so much. It is incredibly beefy. It can be a little on the tough side, so again, going against the grain, keeping those slices nice and thin for optimal tenderness. Next up, let's talk prime rib, which is basically just a bunch of ribeyes all bunched up together as one big roast. Now this one's controversial, but the first mistake I often see is people cook this bad boy with the bones on. It might sound like a good idea and everybody seems to do it, but there are some major drawbacks. By cooking with the bone on, this is unfortunately what happens. I want you to take a look at these ribs. Yes, they might look juicy and tasty, but the reality is this is a medium rare rib. Ribs require a significantly higher internal temp to get tender. There's also 0 seasonings on them. Not only do we have 0 crust development or seasoning on this side, but most importantly on our prime rib, this bottom side, 0 char, 0 seasonings, just completely bland meat. Unfortunately, it keeps getting worse. We'll slice right down the middle. What I want you to notice is the gradient. As you can see, it is significantly more rare on the bottom of the roast compared to a thoroughly overcooked top. And remember, the cap is the best part, and we've completely torched it. Now, the reason for that major gradient is the bones. They act as this insulating layer as it cooks, making that bottom part way more rare than the overcooked top. So as you can see, many issues here, but fortunately, I got the solution. This right here is how to nail prime rib every time. If there's bones, start by removing them very simply, just like so. Peeling downwards, just following that curve. Now this next tip is subtle, but very important. What you wanna do is feel around the top here for the seam of fat / silver skin that kind of lays above that first layer. All you gotta do is peel it back like so. From here, you can either just slice, thus leaving on the tail, but generally, I personally like to get it nice and clean, completely removing the fat on the side. Now this little seam of chewy silver skin might not seem like much, but I'm telling you, if you leave it on, it can have a devastating impact on the final product. For one, it is extremely chewy and just will never render. But potentially more devastating is the impact it'll have on the flavor penetration and the crust. As you can see, the seasonings in the cap have completely separated, leaving us with this atrocious pale colored bald spot. Zero char, zero seasonings, but honestly 99% of prime ribs you see on the internet look like this. This is what we want to do instead. You're going to want to gently tie up your roast to make sure that cap stays on. No need to go too tight, you just want to get it secure in place. Notice that clean, symmetrical, almost circular shape to our prime rib here. Now we'll just season the prime rib thoroughly. This is a thick cut, almost impossible to over season at this stage. And now because we remove those bones, we can season the top of them, well as a little layer on the bottom. From here, it's into a low temperature 250-degree oven. And talk about a night and day difference with our second prime rib. Because we separated those ribs, we have incredible bark and seasoning on both sides. Cooked like this, they've also been able to render significantly better. When it comes to the prime rib itself, as you can see, zero bald spots, 360-degree bark and seasoning. Flawless edge-to-edge medium rare with zero gradient. On literally every level, this is a far superior prime rib. The final key is you technically don't have to tell your guests about the ribs, so if you want to keep them for yourself, by all means, have at it.
Hey, where you going, Max? I want some of those ribs.
Not gonna happen, Buster.
Give me the damn rib.
One of my all-time favorite cuts, but very easy to mess up, it's time for picanha. We're gonna start by cooking this one whole, and a lot of purists say to only season with rock salt. In my opinion, you're leaving tons of flavor on the table. Don't tell the Brazilians, but personally, I'll just use, like, for example, kosher salt, some black pepper, even some garlic powder. Now, is this truly the most authentic way to cook Brazilian picanha? No, but just like any other cut of beef, more flavor often is better. A mistake I often see is people under-seasoning specifically bigger cuts. When it's this size, it can take a lot more seasoning than you think. And let's get it on the grill. And just like that, our beautiful picanha has been cooked to perfection. Now I'm gonna slice into it, and I want you to think in your head, what is wrong with this piece of picanha right here? I mean, it looks tender, definitely looks juicy, but in my opinion, there's a problem. Just take a look at the size of that fat cap. Now, don't get me wrong, I love fat. It is absolutely delicious. But if you serve this to most guests, I promise you, they're gonna be weirded out. So the lesson here is that when cooking a picanha whole, make sure to do quite a bit of aggressive trimming. I promise you, it'll be worth it in the end. I mean, it's basically 50% fat. Now, the next major issue I often see with whole picanha is how it's sliced. It's super easy to finish cooking it, getting all excited, and just going in on it with your knife. You know, it looks juicy, you cooked it perfectly, you rested it, everything's going well, except unfortunately, you sliced it with the grain. As you can see, the fibers are running the long way, which means your teeth have to bite through and end up doing a lot of work. When sliced right, this is a very tender cut, but I could honestly barely bite through that. Now compare that to the difference in texture to a piece I cut directly against the grain. It is just significantly more pull apart tender. Okay, now I love cooking picanha whole. I also love it churrasco style, but by far my favorite method is to cook it like a steak. Now before we slice this into steaks, what you'll see here is something called silver skin, which is a big no-no. This almost metallic looking layer is silver skin, very different than fat, which would be more like this here or like the fat cap. The rule of thumb is to always remove silver skin when possible. This is a great way to ruin a steak and make it way too chewy. If you see silver skin, make sure you get rid of it. A little trick, instead of starting on the side, you can actually go right down the middle first. Allows you to cleanly get one side, lift it up, and then peel through the back. Just makes it a little bit easier. And how you slice these picanha steaks is absolutely critical and a little bit counterintuitive. As you can see here, the grain is roughly running this way. What a lot of people think is, okay, I'm cooking my steaks, let's slice them against the grain, some beautiful, tender picanha. That's wrong. What you actually want to do is start by slicing your steaks directly with the grain. I like to keep it about an inch, maybe inch and a quarter. With our steak cooked, it becomes very clear as to why we started by slicing with the grain. Again, we have that distinctive grain running top to bottom. What it means is that when we take our beautiful slices just like so, again, leaving a little bit of that fat cap over the top, what you'll notice is that we are now slicing directly against or perpendicular to the grain. Absolutely critical for tenderness. I'm also slicing a bit on the thinner side, which will also help with tenderness. It's just so insanely juicy. Steak does not get much better than that. Now, another mistake I'll see is people will slice their beautiful picanha steaks. They'll see this nice fat cap and think, oh yeah, fat is flavor. Let's leave that on, it's gonna be delicious. And to be fair, picanha fat is delicious, but there's a point where too much is too much. Like if you look close, the proportion of fat to meat here is just way too high. So just like the importance of trimming picanha fat when you cook it whole, it's just as important to trim your picanha fat when cooking like a steak. Something like this should be perfect. With them cooked, you can really see the difference between an untrimmed and a trimmed picanha. We'll start with our picanha that had the fat cap beautifully trimmed up. As you can see on the side there, it still has a pretty significant fat cap, but it's not excessive and will lead to a nice, tender, juicy bite. Let's compare that to our untrimmed steak. As you can see, just an absurd fat cap on there. Now look, if you like fat and you enjoy your steaks this way, truthfully, I have no problem with it. Like honestly, I would still eat this bite no problem, but for most people, I find, especially when you're serving guests, trimming that down a bit is key. But if we're being real, picanha's picanha. Look, I'm not gonna complain about this. So maybe don't trim the fat cap. You do you. The last thing I'll say here is don't lose faith in picanha, okay? It's an incredible cut. However, there is some unique anatomy in which some pieces are gonna be a lot more tender than others. So if you happen to get a piece that isn't great, doesn't feel super tender, have faith, keep trying different parts of it, and you'll end up falling in love. There it is, guys. If you made it this deep into the video, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please drop a comment. Let me know what you thought about it. Appreciate the support, and we'll see you next time.